I have here a Texans fan team that we screwed over and over again last year and the year before. I think we won at Houston 34-0.
This is the ambassador of Colombia, and because it's the ambassador of Colombia and I am just a merely person interviewing him.
A pure mortal.
I am a pure mortal. I'll be very, very kind. But the ambassador here got his degree from the University of Texas in journalism.
I'm a Longhorn.
So therefore, you're a Longhorn, and for everything that we've said here, you're forgiven. Anyhow, let's get busy. We're about to get started.
Okay.
I am here with Ambassador Francisco Santos, Ambassador of Colombia, and who knows what else later on, but there's a lot that we have to talk about. First of all, Ambassador, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm a journalist at heart and as profession. I was kidnapped by Pablo Escobar in 1990.
Yes.
Because of my very strong stance as a journalist against drug traffickers, against terrorism. Then I created an NGO that helped kidnap victims in the 90s.
First, people don't know what an NGO is. Explain what that is.
A non-governmental organization that used to help victims that were being kidnapped in Colombia. Nobody used to help them. Then in the year 2000, when we were doing huge marches against the terrorist groups because of the kidnappings they were having in Colombia, I was targeted by the FARC, and I had to leave Colombia, and I went to live in Spain. So twice I got only 5 lives. Of a cat, I have 5 lives only.
You have 4 left.
I have, yeah, and after that I was in Spain, and candidate Álvaro Uribe said to me, "You want to be vice presidential candidate?" I said, "I don't know nothing about politics. I'm a journalist." And he said, "Don't worry, you'll learn." And crazy as I am, I said yes.
And you became the vice president of Colombia.
I became vice president of Colombia between 2002 and 2010. We changed Colombia with President Uribe from almost a failed state to one of the jewels in Latin America, with the help of the U.S., with the help of Plan Colombia, and I have to be very grateful to what the U.S. taxpayer and politicians did regarding Colombia. Afterwards, I went back to journalism. I was being so hard on the president then, Mr. President, that I got fired. Because
and when did you get fired?
In 2012, because I wouldn't put the pedal off the metal. So that happens in our region and in our countries, and after that I decided to go back in politics, and I've helped my party. I helped my party win elections, lose elections. I was candidate for the mayor of Bogota. I lost, and I helped President Duque get elected from our party, and he decided he needed sort of a bicultural person to be in Washington, and so he decided to pick me.
What do you mean by bicultural person in Washington?
I'm a big part of me is American.
Right.
I went to school here 5 years. I love this country. During the 8 years with President Uribe, I had to come to Washington many times to show the progress in Plan Colombia, to show what was happening in human rights, etc. So hey, I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. That cannot be more bicultural than
and that. You're a UT Longhorn, so yes. I will attest to that.
Yes,
and given that I'm originally from Central America as well, Panama, I think we kind of share that same history. And by the way, I could also be considered an honorary Colombian because Panama was once the province of Colombia.
Yes, sir. Roosevelt took that away from us.
Oh, well, I did. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring that up about the gunboat in front of Colón or not, but I guess since you brought it up. But anyway.
It was called gunboat diplomacy for something.
It was called gunboat diplomacy for a reason. Anyway, we got the canal and you got an ally. But anyhow.
We got great friends and we have a great relation with Panama.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's move this on a bit to Venezuela. I don't know where you're going to stand on Venezuela, but I definitely have some issues that I'd like to discuss with you on that particularly. First of all, express to me in your own words how you see the Venezuelan situation, not necessarily concentrating on Maduro, but Venezuela as a country.
The biggest humanitarian crisis in the world right now, in the world. The biggest refugee crisis in the world right now, the biggest tragedy, economic tragedy, probably in the world, other than North Korea, with continental dimensions. 1.3 million refugees in Colombia, 600,000 in Peru, between 250 and 300,000 in Ecuador, 180,000 in Chile, and around 100,000 in Argentina, and in Brazil we don't know how many because of the.
And Panama has quite a few as well.
No, and they're going to start moving. If we don't solve that, we will have probably 1 or 2 or 3 million refugees more in the next year and a half. That's going to destabilize the continent. So for all of you U.S. listeners of this program, you have your backyard on fire. This is probably the biggest crisis the U.S. The continent has had in its history, a humanitarian crisis. And I think what we are working together, the countries from the Grupo de Lima, which is a Latin American country that got together to solve this problem, with the U.S., it's a task at hand that needs to be performed, because otherwise the U.S., Colombia, and the region can have a crisis like Somalia. Venezuela can become Somalia on steroids, because it has oil, it has drug trafficking, or worse even, Syria. So that's the level of crisis that the continent has regarding Venezuela.
Okay, now let's go specifically to Nicolas Maduro. And I want to ask a question in this fashion. Was Nicolas Maduro elected democratically or not?
No.
And how would you explain
it was a farce. It was a farce, because one of the things that the Chavismo did, and this type of socialist revolutions happen, is that once they're in power elected democratically, they start piercing and taking away all the independence of powers, all the possibilities of having free elections, all the possibilities of having real free elections, of having a political debate. The media is all controlled, and what you have is an electoral system that the presidency controls. Guess who counts the votes? So guess what happens? You always get elected. Remember, Ceausescu was elected and had 99% of the votes.
We know that was a farce. Now
this is a farce, more sophisticated, a little bit more sophisticated, but it was a farce nonetheless.
Let me ask you a few questions in that regards. Isn't it true that several of the other parties chose voluntarily not to participate in the election?
Yes, because there were no guarantees of that of having the counting of the votes by an independent agency of the government to happen.
Is it also not true that there was a candidate that was leading, I can't remember his name off the back of my head, that the United States suggested strongly that he not participate in the election?
No, I don't know about that. I don't know if I don't know if the U.S. did something. I don't know, but you know what? I think the Venezuelans understand very clearly and have been worked very clearly in terms of the decision they are making. So I guess all of the main opposition parties did not go to elections because they understood that those elections were a farce.
Okay. Now, so are we saying then that we want that several countries should come together and overthrow a Nicolas Maduro, or are we saying we'd like to have a diplomatic solution in which negotiations are taking place? Because I think, isn't it not true that both groups, both factions, or actually several factions in Venezuela, actually it's more than just 2 factions in Venezuela, is it not true that no one of them really has a majority of the population that want them?
The solution is very simple: free elections.
I think that's what everybody wants.
That's what everybody wants. Does Maduro want free elections? Certainly not. He would have had free elections 2 years ago, or a year ago. He could have resolved this. If he really was a Democrat, he could have done it just last year. So why didn't he? The problem is that we're talking about a thug, and he's a thug. Venezuela, under his
leadership.
I wouldn't call it. To say about that's not leadership.
Okay.
Under his hand.
Under his tutelage.
Under his tutelage, has become a rogue state. Most of Colombian drug trafficking is going through Venezuela. And there it's
let me ask
most of the illegal gold from Colombia is being shipped out of Venezuela and laundered in Turkey
and Saudi Arabia.
I don't know if Saudi Arabia. I know Turkey. What you are seeing is a country where illegal groups and illegal organizations and illegal mafias are thriving because they're protected by the state. So you don't. It's very difficult to negotiate with that type of regime. And so the Latin American nations, what they have done is create a diplomatic blockade. U.S. sanctions are now squeezing the money out of the regime. The Constitution allowed for an interim government because there is. So you have in position the solution, which is rebuilding the institutions and having elections. Can that be done with Maduro? I don't think so.
Some would say that the real issue here is, and this is not on individuals personally, because things have a way of having their own gravity. Some may have a belief that the real issue with both beginning with Chavismo and now with Maduro is that this is a socialist government sitting on top of the largest pool of oil. Do you think that has anything to do with America's great interest in Venezuela, while it does not have a lot of interest in many other countries where probably other atrocities similar or worse are occurring?
I don't know what other countries have similar atrocities. What I have to say is the U.S. is the #1 exporter of oil now in the world.
Will be, yeah, pretty soon, yeah.
So that argument would have been maybe valid 10 years ago. It's not valid now.
Yeah.
The U.S. is sitting in the largest pool of oil in the world.
We are.
So that's sort of the traditional argument that's being used. No, we have the worst humanitarian crisis. I've been in Cucuta in the past 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 3 times. You should talk to them.
Chicken and the egg.
You should talk to them. You should talk what they are suffering, how they can get food if they're once a day, if they're lucky.
Yeah.
They have to decide which member of the family eats or doesn't eat. And you're talking about one of the richest countries in Latin America.
It
and
is.
they just threw it down the toilet.
Ambassador, chicken and the egg.
Okay.
I think Maduro mismanaged completely the Venezuelan economy. I think Maduro is a crook.
Yes, he is.
I honestly think he's a crook.
I agree with you.
My concern is that according to the numbers and according to the laws of the person who governed them, that he was elected. I know a lot of people may call it a fraudulent election, but here in the United States, and you probably shouldn't talk about this specifically, being the ambassador from Colombia to the United States, but we have a president in our own country that is that we think may not have been legitimately elected as well. I think we would take issue if Angela Merkel came and said, well, he is not really the legitimately elected president of the United States, and thus Hillary Clinton is the president. My concern, and this is where I'm trying to get answers from all sides, and it's essential that we get answers from all sides. Should we look through that prism that we have here in the United States as well, and say, just maybe, even if Maduro to many is illegitimate, that we should ensure that instead of having the threats of military intervention, having the threats of squeezing the economy and the people that are suffering, because I can see in your face, you've seen the pain of the people in Venezuela. You've seen that. They're hurting. but are they hurting because of the policies of Maduro or because of the external squeezing of the
let me first start by putting in context your commentary and your question. Is there a free press in the U.S.? Yes. Is there a free press in Venezuela? No.
I agree with that.
Is there free courts in the U.S.? Yes. Are there free courts in Venezuela? No. Is there an electoral system that has? Are there checks and balances in the U.S. or in? Yes. Are there checks and balances in Venezuela? No. That's what makes the situation different. Mm-hmm. That's what makes what made the elections an impossibility for the opposition. The opposition wanted to go to the elections, but when who's counting the votes, mm-hmm. It's not somebody that gives credibility, especially after what has happened. You decide not to participate. That's what happened. And what they're looking for is, we want elections under which we have the absolute guarantee that the one who has the most amount of votes will get elected. And I think that's one of the objectives, or the objective. And I think that's very important to understand in what all of the countries in Latin America are pushing for, one way or the other, and the U.S. too, and Canada.
I have one more Venezuelan question.
But you asked me, the second question was, if it was the sanctions. The sanctions started
under Obama.
But there were sanctions to individuals.
Individual people, yes.
To individuals, crooks that stole billions.
Yes.
No. What you see is from 2002 to from 99 to 2019, the management of an economy and of a society under ideological perspectives, of there's no liberty. The state has to take all your liberties. The state has to own all the means of property, and this is where you got. This is a homebred crisis. This is something that Chavez and Maduro brewed, and now have to drink.
Okay.
It's an internal destruction of the richest country in Latin America, and it's hurting us.
Right.
You know,
well, I mean, it's hurting. I agree that the turmoil in Venezuela is very damaging to Colombia, very damaging to Brazil, very damaging to all these countries. My only concern, and look, there are a lot of ideological arguments that I see coming from all sides in this particular debate, and I think one of the things that's concerning me is it's okay to have the ideological debate.
Yeah, it is perfectly.
What I think we have to be careful of, Ambassador, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I think what we have to be careful about is making sure that, in as much as we have ideological differences between the different types of economies that people want, that what we are putting out there is the absolute truth of what is actually occurring. And my concern, again, and I know you know the story of Carlos Andrés Pérez and these other former supposed democratic leaders of Venezuela. And I'm sure you also know that in as much as Venezuela has been sitting on a pool of oil for all this time, that the spoils had never gone to the vast majority, but to less than 10% of the population. So when we have Chavismo and all of that, to some extent Chavismo is the result, in my opinion, and you tell me if you agree or not, Chavismo was a result of an oppressed people by a perceived or a purported democratic country.
No, I wouldn't talk to oppressed people. It was a political decision that Venezuela took, and look where it has brought them. Sure, that they mismanaged a lot of their oil. Yeah.
Yes, the oil was mismanaged.
That the Venezuelans lived 100 times better in 1997 than today. It's also true. And 99%. Look.
Wait. Under just one number. Under Chavismo, poverty did get much better, correct?
No. Look, let me tell you.
Okay.
Let me tell you something.
Okay.
All the studies that you have now talk about a country that has lost its GDP
completely. Agree.
And it's now in almost absolute poverty.
It is.
Chavez found a gold mine, which was oil barrel at $100.
$100 a barrel.
So he was able, and he did. I wouldn't say he did good things in terms of providing. But
I think that part is. I think that part is important. I think it is important for people to understand why Chavismo came about.
Oh no, I understand. No, I understand it. The problem with this is that Chavismo doesn't represent a democratic option. That's the difference.
What option do you call it?
No, that of having a transition of governments and of having a success of governments and of the only election, he lost a couple of elections, and when he lost them, he invalidated them. So he took the power. So to me, I don't care if Chavez is rebirth and gets elected, and he doesn't destroy the institutionality and loses 4 years, like it happened in Brazil, or it happens in Argentina where they had the Kirchner and now they have Macri, or it happens in Chile where they had Bachelet and now they have that's the main problem.
We shouldn't use Brazil. That's not a good example because of what happened to Lula and because of what happened to Dilma himself. But I mean, that's dangerous as well.
No, it's dangerous.
That could happen to. When you were vice president of Colombia, and folks, he was the vice president of Colombia. If I had understood what happened in how somebody had taken you out of power in Colombia after being legitimately and democratically elected, we would have raised hell about that as well.
No, I understand. I understand your point, but what I'm telling you is that Venezuela and the Bolivarian movement,
exactly,
doesn't. The majority of them, because there are some that don't.
Argentina supported the Bolivarian movement. Peru did, and so did Bolivia and several other countries.
What I'm telling you is that in those countries, institutionality was not broken, and there were elections. Look, the Correa candidate in Ecuador lost.
Yes.
And you have now Lenin Moreno. Okay.
And
look, in
institutions were maintained.
Exactly. What they destroyed in Venezuela was the democratic institutionality.
And I agree with you.
And in that sense, it went from some would call a fantastic political experiment to a dictatorship.
Right.
When Chavez died, it was a dictatorship.
And
there was no freedom of the press, or there was no balance of powers. And I think democracy, if it doesn't have all those contexts,
right,
it's not a democracy. If you don't have checks and balances,
right,
if you don't have a court that can stop a president, if you don't have a Congress that can become, if you don't have, those things are integral part of democracy.
And I think everybody would agree with you, and I think everybody agree that Maduro has severe problems, and ultimately Maduro is not going to last. We know that. Now, when it comes to solutions, why do we want to make Guaido the solutions as opposed to simply keeping the status quo and working towards a national election? And that's the last question on Venezuela.
Because the Constitution, when the elections are invalid because of the fraudulent or there's a vacuum of power in Venezuela. The Constitution made by the Bolivarian, by the Bolivarian, let's say that.
I understand.
Says in article, I think 323 or 232, I can't remember. If there's a vacuum, the president of the assembly becomes head of state until there's a transition, and that's what happened. And look, and I understand. Some people might say, no, that shouldn't be. There's an option that happened, and now it's an option that the Venezuelans are looking forward, and it must be a transition. And believe me, if there are elections, Maduro's candidates or whomever the candidates from the Chavismo are going to be able to run freely, and maybe then we will see what.
And maybe that's the point of compromise. Maybe the point of compromise is not requiring Maduro to step down, but requiring organized elections that are actually spewed up from the external.
Yes.
But right now, what we have as a concern is Donald Trump has just passed or just submitted a budget where he's asking for $500 million to support democracy at whatever cost in Venezuela.
No, look.
And that would be a concern if you were the president of Venezuela or the president of Colombia. If you heard that there is a superpower putting that kind of money behind having some effect in your country, I think that would create some issues, right?
Let me tell you, if I were Maduro, I would be very worried.
Yeah.
And not only because of that, because he destroyed his country, because he is politically surrounded, and because the only way he can stay in power is with the Cuban thugs that he has around him. So yes, that for other reasons. What we are doing as Colombians and as Latin Americans, for the first time in history, is starting our diplomacy to create a new scenario for Venezuela. Remember, the Grupo de Lima, the U.S. is not part of the Grupo de Lima. And it was the Grupo de Lima that recognized the Assembly as the only democratic institution left in Venezuela. It was the Grupo de Lima that created the scenario of putting an alternative. And that's the Latin American countries deciding the future of a country and helping decide the future of a country without the U.S. interference. I think that's a huge evolution in terms of political maturity for our countries. For the first time, the Latin American countries were sanctioning a country without having the U.S. in the middle of it. Because, unfortunately, for a reason that is traumatic, which is having millions of Venezuelans migrating. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have.
One question, as I don't remember his name right now, the envoy that Donald Trump just assigned to Latin America, who was once convicted.
Elliot Abrams.
Has he met with anybody from the Grupo de Lima?
Yes, he has met with all of us. I met him. I met him last week.
And that is my concern.
What?
In as much as the Grupo de Lima is all todos somos Latinoamericanos, all Latin Americans, that they would meet, I think it's problematic.
Working with the U.S. as partners to get this problem solved diplomatically, hopefully solved peacefully, and hopefully to make Venezuela return to a democratic scenario. I don't think you have seen that happening in Latin America ever. Before, it used to be a coup d'etat. That hasn't happened, even though we have a dictatorship in Venezuela. Sometimes from the left they say, oh, the American invasion. Really? The only country that's right now being invaded is Venezuela, by the more than 20,000 Cubans that they have there.
Are there really 20,000 Cubans?
There are between doctors and military personnel, and the military personnel in Cuba is around 5,000, especially because they put a parallel government or a parallel.
You see how that becomes a problem when you say there are doctors that are Cuban and that's included in the 20,000, right?
Oh yeah, no, because they indoctrinate, because they create. So it's a civilian military invasion, but the invasion of the military is absolutely real. The military have a parallel organization that works at brigade level, at battalion level, of commanders from Cuban intelligence. So to deny it is no. That's the reality of what's happening in Venezuela right now. The only real invasion right now in Latin America is by the Cubans in Venezuela. That's a reality. That's a fact. So sometimes what you need and what you have is what you need to talk clearly. We are trying to get Venezuela back on track in a democratic scenario. That's what we're trying. We're trying to do it peacefully through a diplomatic blockade with economic sanctions from the Latin American countries and from the U.S. too. And we hope we'll be successful for the good of Colombia, of Latin America, and the Venezuelans.
I am so happy that you gave this interview. But I mean, would you say, and I think we can all conclude that what we really are saying here is we would love to have most, if not all, countries in Latin America and beyond be capitalist democracies. Is that correct?
Democracies.
Capitalist.
Real democracies.
Okay.
Democracies. Whatever model of economic decision making they decide, well, that's for the people to decide. Mm-hmm. If they decide and firmly decide and they that want to go this way or the other, that's the decision.
Right.
That's the decision. That's the decision that they have to take. The problem is when you take that decision away from the hands of the citizens. That's what's happened in Venezuela. That's what is happening in Nicaragua. And those type of decisions, when the powerful government or a president or the head of state takes away the independence of powers, you create that type of supposedly democratic country, but it's just a facade for a dictatorship.
Ambassador Francisco Santos, I hope I'll get a chance to talk to you, maybe, who knows, in a different position later on in life. And I hope that as a member of the Grupo de Lima, as you go back, you remember those words. A democracy with whatever economic system they decide that they want to have, to ensure that everybody in that country has equal access to success.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I thank you, and
it was a pleasure speaking
to you. And have a good day.
Great Longhorn.
And